Hey, welcome back. It is day 3. Day 3 is always an exciting day in camp because we put the hardest one on day 3. It's just kind of how we do the camp. So you get better and better and better. And so Wednesday is like when you're ready to tackle the hardest thing. And then it'll get easier after that. Thursday is a little easier. Friday is usually kind of like a half day, right? So today we're going to tackle something big. I'm here with my campers again as per usual. Campers, are you ready to tackle something huge today?
Yeah.
Are you ready to go? We'll see. I will say that it is literally so big you may want to plan to do this video like part of it now and then part of it later because it's a big one, right? It's good for you though. Let's see what we're making. So I've got a demo solution on here. Now normally the demo solution I just kind of show pretty quickly. Just for what we're trying to do. But this time what I want to do is I want you to think about what types of things you would have to write in the code. So what are some things, and I'll say some out loud as we're doing it. But here's how the game works. So when I hit the play button, this game is called Irish Sheepdog. I am the Irish Sheepdog, so I'm running around. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to push sheep into the pen. And you can see that the way that I push them is I get behind them. And then I drive them into the pen. Driving the dog around is actually kind of hard. He uses up arrow to go forwards, and then he turns with left and right, and then he can also go backwards. That's just kind of a feature of the dog. And whenever he's touching the sheep go into the pen. One trick you can do, which is kind of fun, is backwards. You don't push sheep, so you can kind of like back over the top of them, and then you can get in front of them. You'll learn that it takes a little while to get good at driving the sheepdog. So that was a demo. Now let's talk about responsibilities. So when the game starts, a few things had to happen, right? So one thing that had to happen is somebody has to make all the sheep, right? So that's something that has to happen. Also, the dog has to move with the arrow keys. That's something that has to happen. Sheep, if they're touching the dog, they need to move with the dog. Sheep that are touching the pen have to move with the pen. Sorry, have to move into the pen. And then at the end of the game, there's also this fastest time. So right now, last time my fastest time was 45. I'm going to see if I'm faster this time. Not really behind him good, so I'll get behind him good. And there you can see that I got 39 seconds. So the idea of this game is just you're trying to corral them as fast as you can, and it keeps track of your fastest time. By the way, there's also a feature that if I hit spacebar, it resets the fastest time. So that's what the game is. And our goal this time, since it doesn't necessarily look big yet, but it's big, trust me, it's big, is to work on planning. So one of the big things for today that we want to do is we want you to be able to think about a plan. So really when you're making games on your own, you just kind of come up with ideas. But what you need to do is you kind of need to get out a pencil and paper and just kind of like plan who's going to be responsible for what. So we're going to do that with our campers together. So we're going to try to come up with what are some of the different tasks that we need to do in this game, and then which sprite is going to be responsible for it. I'm going to move the camera over to where you can see this projector better. All right, so obviously these are slides, so I can only go in some order. But I'm going to ask my campers, what are some things that need to happen? What are some tasks that need to happen in this game? Keegan?
We need to create 10 sheep.
Need to create 10 sheep. That's a good one. So I'm going to go ahead and go to that one. You got one for free. So I had started timer as something that needs to happen. So we need to create 10 sheep. These 10 sheep are all going to be clones. So I could have written on the word clones on here because there's only one sheep sprite. Also, I'm going to add one more on here for what Keegan said. These sheep, I don't know if you noticed, but they're randomly put on there, but in places that are not touching the pen or the dog. Because you don't want to start on the dog, and you definitely don't want to start in the pen. So that's something that we're going to do. What's another task that we need to do? McKinley?
Have the dog move with the arrow keys.
Have the dog move with the arrow keys. That's a great one. I don't know what's next. Oh, awesome. You lucked right into it. So the dog needs to move using the arrow keys. So he's got the up, the down, and then the left and the right. So we're going to have to do those things. What other things have to happen? Keegan?
You need to make a sound.
you need to make a sound. So like whenever the sheep get put into the pen, you have to make a sound. That's a little lower on my list, so I'm going to ask McKinley for one. McKinley, what's another thing you have to do?
Whenever you're touching the sheep in the back, you can move them.
Okay, so what she said was when you're touching a sheep with the dog, they have to also move, right? So sheep touching the dog will move with the dog. And then the one Keegan said was basically sheep touching the pen are moved into the pen, right? So there's a couple things that have to happen there. Other things that have to happen, I'll just kind of throw these last couple. You guys did great. Thank you very much. We're going to have to track the number of sheep that are in the pen. And then we're going to have to like know when the game ends. And then you can't see this, but there's some like game over, like check for the fastest time. Now the next question, who's responsible for these things? Now, obviously, we've got a dog, we've got a sheep, we've got a pen, and then we've also got the background or the stage. And so those are the three sprites that we're going to have, and then you've also always got the background. So who's going to start the timer? So who do you think is going to reset the timer? Keegan?
The backdrop.
Yeah, so you can actually do this on either. It could be done by the backdrop, or you could do it with the dog. Either would work. Who's going to create the 10 sheep? McKinley?
The backdrop.
The backdrop, yep. And now I'm gonna cheat a little bit. This game is pretty big. I'm gonna choose, this is a voluntary choice, to do these things that could happen on the backdrop. I'm gonna choose to do them on the dog. Just so that I have no code on the backdrop. That may not be the greatest choice in the world, but that's how I'm gonna do it, and you're stuck with the way I do things, right? So we're gonna choose to just do them on the dog. And then this creation of the sheep that aren't touching the pen, this is going to be the job of the sheep. By the way, the sheep are actually going to be involved with the creation of sheep as well, right? Because they have to have a little bit of code. Dog moves with the arrow key. Who does that?
Dog.
Dog, so that one's right. The sheep will move with the dog. Who does that?
Sheep.
That's actually a combo. So it's a dog and the sheep combo, right? Sheep touching the pen moved into the pen.
Sheep.
So that's the sheep, and then it also involves the pen, right? And then there's some tracking of the sheep in the pen. Who do you think's going to do that?
Pen.
Yeah, so the pen plus the sheep. And then the game over stuff I'm just going to all do with the dog. So this is my plan. I could say that with the slides a little cleaner. So I mean, I think that maybe it looks cleaner on the slides. I always like this game, but you cover up your whiteboard with this. So each of these responsibilities is going to happen by one of our sprites, right? And then if I were to take this list and rearrange it by whose responsibilities everything was, there's certain responsibilities for the sheep. So this is what the sheep needs to do. There's certain responsibilities for the pen. And then there's certain responsibilities for the dog. So it's going to be kind of complex. I'm going to move the camera back over. And so we'll actually refer to this plan as we build our game. And we're going to start somewhere. We're actually going to start with, I'm going to give you some images here in just a second. And we're going to start by implementing things on the dog. Now the dog actually, I'll say, has a couple things. He's got kind of some initialization things that happen. And then he's got some movement things that happen, and then he's got some game over things that happen. Those three categories we're actually going to break down for the dog. So to get started with this, what I need you to do is I need you to remix a Scratch project that I made for you. The link that you need to go to is right here. So it's scratch.mit.edu projects, and then you can see this is the number. I'll put this number in the email. I'll put this number in the video just below this YouTube video. I'll also put this number on the main camp page, so connectingwithcode.org/camp. If all those things failed, you can always type it. And essentially what you need to do is you need to go to this web page. So here I'm on this web page, and then you need to click on the word remix. So if you click on the word remix, it will actually make a copy of this project and put it over in your area. And it will name it Irish Sheepdog Starting Code Remix. What I'm going to choose to do is I'm going to take off the word starting code remix because this is my Irish sheepdog. So that's what I'm going to save this project as. All right, so whenever I get starting code from someone, I always like to take a minute and see what all is there, right? What am I looking at? So you can see that I've got a couple different sprites. I've got a sheep sprite, so here's my sheep. I've got a sheepdog sprite, and then I've got a pen. And also I've got a backdrop. By the way, these are all just kind of custom images, which is why it was easier to remix than to let you find these things. If you go look at the costumes, you can see there's only one costume for the sheep. That's pretty simple. The dog was actually an animated GIF. So he actually has literally like 141 costumes. And it'll make him look like he's barking. So it's an animated GIF file. And then the pen, I did something super sneaky for the pen. The pen actually is a costume that has various sheep in it, right? So it's kind of funny. Costume 1 has 0 sheep. Costume 2 has 1 sheep. Costume 3 has 2 sheep. And so actually what we're going to do is whenever they get put into the pen, really we're going to delete the clone and we're going to switch the costume on the pen. Sneaky, isn't it? Yeah, very sneaky. All right, so let's dive in and start coding. We're going to start in with the dog. And so the dog has some initialize task. He's got some movement task. And then he's got some like check for game over task. And one thing you can do when you're planning your code is you can use functions just to organize complex things. So what we're going to do is we're going to make these 3 functions: initialize, move, and check for game over. And you can see that this is what the dog does. He initializes once, and then he forever moves and checks for game over. So let's go ahead and go into the code for the dog. Let's grab a when green flag clicked. And then to keep ourselves organized, because we've got a big game here, we're going to use functions to stay organized. The first function is going to be called initialize. I'm going to go ahead and type the whole thing here. So you create the function initialize, and then we'll stick on the initialize block. Initialize is, of course, hard to spell. I think I got it right. I had to go help Keegan. After initialize, I also want to make a block called move. And so move is going to happen inside a forever loop. So I'm going to go ahead and go to control and say forever. And then I'm going to stick on my move block in there. And then the last function we're going to use is check for game over. Kind of a long one to type there. So check for game over. By the way, if you ever need to pause the video because it takes you longer to type than it takes me to type, that's totally fine. Just pause the video. No big deal. And we've got these 3 functions, check for game over. So the code so far doesn't do anything. It's simply getting some planning together. I'm going to do check for game over last, so I'm just going to kind of like set it over here out of the way. But this initialize and move we're going to do pretty early. So what are some things that the dog needs to do during the initialize thing? And this is where plans are really useful. He needs to start a timer. All right, so part of this is he needs to start a timer. There's also some things that I realize now should have been in my plan that weren't there, and that's fine, I just add them. For example, I never said in my plan that I should set the dog's starting position. Well, I would like for him to start, I'm just going to make him start in the corner. There's a good spot that he can kind of start over here. And that wasn't in my plan, but I've got to do it. So I'm actually going to put him where I want him to start. And then I'm going to go to motion, and I'm going to say go to XY. That's going to be part of initialize. And then I'm going to go ahead and also put on this point in direction 90. So he points in direction 90. So just to make sure that my code's working, if I put him somewhere different, when I hit the green flag, he should snap to that starting position. So the code doesn't do much yet, but it does work. It's kind of nice that you can just make these dummy functions. It's just kind of like placeholders for your planning, but we haven't actually used them yet. All right, so the thing that it said to do is start a timer. There's actually a built-in timer. It's in sensing. And so the timer is actually like a magical built-in thing. And so the only thing we need to do to start the timer is we need this function reset timer. So that's literally the only thing we need to do. I'll make my screen just a little bigger for you here. So reset timer will do that task. And so like if I was marking them off, I would just mark that line off. That one's done. The next thing I need to do is I need to create 10 sheep. So I'm going to use cloning to my advantage here. So I'm going to go to control and make a loop that goes 10 times. Obviously, we could put 10 of them in a row, but we just want a loop that does it. And what I want to do is I want to create a clone of sheep. If I were to run this now, it would look like nothing happened. So if I run it now, it worked. It created 10 sheep. The original is still there, so there's actually 11 sheep. If I were to move them all out, there should be 11 sheep in there. So obviously it worked, but it wasn't what I wanted to have happen, right? So what I want to happen is I want to create 10 sheep, but I want the sheep to go to random positions. That responsibility is actually not on the dog. That responsibility is going to be on the sheep, right? So not touching the pen or the dog. So they're going to be in a random position, not touching the sheep or the dog. So go into the sheep. We're going to be bouncing around sprites for a long time. So just kind of expect that we're just kind of like, we're in the dog for a second, we're in the sheep for a second, we're in the pen for a second. You get the idea. In the sheep. So the sheep need when I start as clone. So sheep start as clone. The first thing that you want sheep to do is you want them to show up because we're going to hide the original. We've done this trick a few times. So I want them to show up and I want them to be in a random position. So I'm going to go to motion and say go to random position. Now if I start the game again, it goes much better. If you were to actually count the sheep, there would be 11 of them because we haven't hidden the original yet. So I'm going to stop the game. I'm going to find the original and I'm going to hide the original. And so now when I run it, there should actually be 10 sheep. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to point out a problem. Mine's a perfect example. Notice where one of my sheep randomly started? I had a sheep that randomly started right in the pen, right? And that we could make that work, but that's not what I want to do because I don't want to start with him in the pen. Likewise, they might randomly start on top of the dog, right? That's not terrible, but it's not what I want. So I want to make sure that they don't start on the dog and that they don't start on the pen. So how do we do that? Do you guys have any ideas?
If statements.
All right, so McKinley said if statements. If statements would totally work. But the thing is, if we put an if statement in here, it would check it once, right? So like we could say, if you're on the pen or on the dog, then go to a new random position. McKinley, you got an idea?
If statements and forever loops?
Yeah, so an if statement and a forever loop. Now, we don't want to go forever, though, because we want to just keep picking new random positions until we're somewhere not touching the dog. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there's a lot of good options. I love that you guys are just firing things out. We're going to use repeat until. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pick a random position, and then we're going to repeat until we're not touching the dog and we're not touching the pen. If either of those things are true, then we're going to pick a new random position and then we'll check again, right? So we're going to pick a random position. Maybe it's fine. If it's not, we're going to pick a new one until this condition's true. Now, what makes this hard is this condition. So it has to be not touching the dog or the pen. So how do we write this statement? So we're going to repeat until it's going to be complex. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to have in here a touching the dog and a touching the pen. Now we want to go until we're not touching those things. So operators have nots. So not touching the sheepdog, not touching the pen. So I want to repeat until I'm not touching him and I'm not touching him, right? So there's an and statement in here. So this thing, it's subtle, but it gets really big really quick, right? Now you have to be careful when you drag these things in. Make sure you grab it like from the not. And so this is like the biggest if statement ever, right? It's so big that I can't even like see the whole thing. So repeat until I'm not touching the sheepdog and I'm not touching the pin. It's actually quite readable. The hardest part is actually like getting it situated to where it goes in here. Remember that you like put the tip of it in there and it goes white. So we test your code dexterity skills there to see if you can make that line of code. So you can see that this time a sheep started right on me, but now with my new revised code, it should not happen. It looks like it happened. Why did it happen? Must have goofed something up. They started the pin, so I goofed something up. All right, so what did I do wrong? I noticed what I did wrong almost right away. My show is at the bottom. The problem with having show at the bottom is it's invisible, right? There's no way to be touching something when you're invisible. So you actually need the show this time to be at the top. Technically, it could be here or here. It doesn't really matter. I'll put it right here just to prove that I understand how it works. So now when you run it, they never show up. Whoa, he showed up above the dog, just barely snuck in there, right? Another thing that McKinley did is she added another and statement and another sensor, and she added a and not. Oh, I should have done it the way McKinley did it. And not touching edge as well, right? So if you want to throw this in, you can, because you'll notice that right now they can show up like half off the screen. I think that seems like a good thing to add. It makes it even more complicated, right? So I'm going to stick this whole and. I don't care if you do this or not. This is optional. If you've got this working, feel free to move forwards. If you want to use Sissy's fancy thing, she took this whole and dropped it into right there. And now she made a, oh shoot, I messed up. So now she grabbed a mega thing. So I've got to grab the right word and to move it around. And then there it is. I told you it was a hard day. I didn't hide that fact at all. Maybe I'll get to where I can show you more code. But now I've got Sissy's solution, so I'm not touching the sheepdog and not touching the pen and not touching the edge. Pretty easy to read and review. It's just hard to make, right? So now let's see if Sissy's solution works. So now I should never be on the edge as well. Sissy, I love it. Good call. All right, so we are doing things great. We're knocking things off of our list. That's super. Next, what we probably ought to do is we ought to move the dog using the arrow keys. I went one slide too far. So initialization's in good shape. Moving the dog using the arrow keys is next. So I'm going to go back to the dog's code. So the dog's initialize is in pretty good shape. I'm okay with what's going on there. Now I'm going to go over to the dog's move area. The dog's move area is going to move using 4 different keys, up, down, left, and right. This does not need to be in a forever loop because over here we've already got a forever loop, right? So we just have if statements over here. And so he's going to respond to the 4 different keys. So I'm going to have a key for up, down, left, and right. So I'm going to just drag them all in. And then I'm going to switch them to up, down, left, and right. And I'm going to give my campers just a minute to catch up. All right, so let's move. Let's do the movement with the arrow keys. So up arrow is going to move the dog forward. So we're going to move at some speed. So I'm going to drag this move 10 in there. I could type in a number for his speed. That'd be fine. But again, it's kind of like ground level in the last app. It's a variable that we're going to use in various places. So I'm going to actually make a variable called dog speed. I'm going to set it in initialize. So go to variables, click on make a variable. We want this to be available for all sprites because we want the sheep to know the dog speed as well. I'm going to type it like this. I'm going to type dog speed. Again, that's just how I like to do variables. So it's 2 words. It's smushed together. It's called camel case. So I've got dog speed. So I make the variable first. The next thing I want to do is I want to set the variable. I don't care where you set it and initialize. It does not matter at all. I'm going to set it right at the top. I'm going to set my dog speed to 3. I like doing this because if you use this variable in multiple places and you decide to change it, you're going to only need to change it right here. It's really a great way to do code. And so over here, I'm going to move at dog speed. By the way, I don't really need to show it on the screen, so I'm just going to hide it so it's not visible there. But what up arrow is going to do is going to move at dog speed. So you can actually play your game now, and when you hit up arrow, your dog should move at dog speed. And if you want him faster, you can make him faster, but 3 is good enough. Down arrow is going to move in the negative direction. So I'm going to go into motion. I'm going to say move. And then he's going to move in negative dog speed. Now, this one I don't care. If you want to just type in -3, I'm okay with that. But if you wanted to actually do it like the elegant way, you would use multiplication. And you would use the variable dog speed again, and you move it -1 times dog speed, right? So that's like the elegant way to do it, because you actually get to use your variable again. So now I can go forwards with up arrow, and then I can go backwards with down arrow, because he's moving at negative dog speed, right? Kind of fun. Left and right arrows are going to be turns. So let's go ahead and figure out which is which. So turning left is this one, because that's going to be kind of like a left turn. I'm going to be a little lazy. I'm just going to type a 5 in here. And then the other one is going to be a 5 there. Again, if I was like trying to be really elegant with my code, I'd make a variable for that as well. But I think that I'm going to cheat a little bit here because this app is quite long. So now I go forwards and backwards. And then I can also go right and left. And take a minute and just kind of practice with your dog, right? Because you need to be able to like drive them into the pen. And then what I typically do is I back up and then I like drive these guys into the pen. And then I kind of back up behind them and then drive them to the pen. And getting good at your own game is fun because then you'll be able to get the fastest time. So driving things into the pen. So I'm pretty happy with the dog movements. So I would call that a check mark on that. So dog moves using arrow keys is done. Next thing we want to do is we want the sheep that are touching the dog to move with the dog. This is a little sneaky as well. So the sheep have to move with me. So we've never done anything like this in a game before. How do we do that? So essentially right here the dog moved, right? So he moved at 10 steps. And what he really needs to do is he needs to tell everybody else that he's moving. And then if they want to move with him, they need to know 2 things. They need to know how fast he's going, and they need to know what direction he's pointing in. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a variable. So go to variables. We're going to call it dog direction. Because the idea is that these other sheep, if they're going to move with the dog, they've got to know his speed, which is already a global variable, and they also need to know his direction. So go ahead and save off dog direction. So what he's going to do is when he moves, he's going to set the variable called dog direction. So he's going to set dog direction. And inside motion, there's actually a variable already called direction. So he's going to set this global variable that everybody can see called dog direction to his direction. So now everybody knows how fast he's going and what direction he's pointing in. And then he's going to broadcast an event. So he's going to, so it's in events, broadcast. And the name of this message, it could be anything you want. I'm just going to call it dog moved. So the dog moved. So he's just telling everybody, hey, the dog moved. And then it'll be their job to see if they also should move, right? And so he's broadcasting dog move to everybody, and it's the sheep that are going to have to listen, right? So let's come over to the sheep. And this was part of our plan, right? So we said that, that the sheep were going to have to move with the dog. That was something that we planned. So come in here to sheep, and for the sheep, say, when I receive. So find when I receive. So when I receive dog moved, I have to decide if I should move too. So campers, get your opinion. How are the sheep going to know if they should move?
If they're touching the dog?
If they're touching the dog, that's exactly right. So I'm going to go into control. And if I am touching the dog, so if he moved, and I'm touching him, then I should move too. And so what I should do is I should point in the same direction as the dog. So I should point myself in the dog's direction. By the way, I don't need to display that on the screen, so I can get rid of that. I just hit the check mark here to not display it. So I need to point in the direction of the dog, and then I need to move at the speed of the dog. So dog speed. And it will appear visually like he's pushing me. But really, I'm just traveling at the same speed as him and at the same direction as him. Let's try it and see if this works. So now, every time I move, I broadcast that I'm moving. But if they're not touching me, then nothing happens. But if I start touching this one, you can see how they snap to the same direction. So as soon as I touch this one, it snaps to the same direction. And it appears as though I'm moving them, which is cool. And so I'm going to push them to the sheep, push them to the pen. When they get to the pen, nothing happens. Notice that I can back right over them, and nothing big happens. And then I can push them in. And this is where kind of like backing up makes you better at your game. You'll also notice that if you look at the code, it doesn't care if you're actually behind them. So this is kind of funny. I'm just going to put my tail on this guy. My tail is enough to make him come with me, right? Cool. So this is going really well. I'm going to pause and help my campers for a little bit. All right, so things are going really good. By the way, this is a great time to take a break. Our family, we decided to just take a little break. We jumped and touched the ceiling for a little while. We ate some snacks. Pause it, take a little break. It's a good time to take a break. Hey, I did notice one thing. I noticed that my dog, he isn't going through different costumes. That's actually something I meant to do earlier. Let's fix this real quick. Go into the dog's code and go find his like main event loop over here. And inside here, just grab a next costume command. Where is it at? I always have trouble finding this next costume. And just stick it, you can stick it anywhere in this loop. I'm going to stick it right there. It doesn't really matter. That way it just kind of makes a cool pyramid. And so now you can see, like as soon as I stick it in there, the dog starts barking. By the way, when I first made this game, I actually made a bark sound the whole time. It gets really annoying, right? So if he just sits there and he just barks the whole time, you're just like, dog, stop barking. All right, so overall, very happy with the game. I'd say it seems pretty obvious what needs to happen next. Campers, what do you guys think we should do next?
Have the sheep actually go into the pen.
Have the sheep actually like go into the pen. That seems like a good thing. And that's hopefully what our plan is telling us to do next. So sheep touching the dog will move. So we did that one. And then our plan says the next thing is sheep touching the pen are moved into the pen. And we need to track the number of sheep that are in the pen, right? So that's our next task. So we decided that responsibility would be on the sheep. So the sheep would do that. So let's go into the sheep's code. And so the sheep needs to check if they're in the pen. We could put that code down here because this is where they move. So we could put it down here. Or we could put it up here. It honestly doesn't matter. I'm going to choose to put it as a forever loop up here, just because that's how I typically write code, and that like there's something that you're doing forever. So I'm going to go into control, and I'm going to stick a forever loop on the bottom of this when I start as clone script. So he's going to like go to some position, and then he's going to forever check if he's touching the pen or not. So that's of course an if statement, and touching the pen is a sensing. So forever, if I'm touching the pen, so the sheep pen, then I'm going to do the code that's inside of here. The code that I want to do is I want to increment a counter so that we know how many sheep there are. And then I also want to change the pen so that it looks like I'm in there. And then I want to delete the clone. So a lot of things I need to do. Let's do the variable first. So click on variables. Let's make a variable. We might display this variable. So I'm going to use the naming convention that I use when something is displayed. I make it public because I'm going to display it, and I'm going to call it num sheep. Whenever you make a variable, you need to initialize its value somewhere. And the question of where do I initialize the value, that could be anywhere. Normally I'd put something like that on the stage, this time I'm not using stage code, so I'm going to put it on the dog. So the dog already has like an initialize area. That seems like a good place to initialize num sheep to be 0 as well. So this is like number of sheep in the pen, right? If you want to be very verbose about it. So I initialize it there. So you make it, you initialize it, and then you increment it over on the sheep. Again, notice how I just seamlessly hop back and forth from the sheep to the dog. So I'm going to change it in here. So I'm going to change my num sheep. So change num sheep by 1. So that's an important thing I have to do. The next thing I have to do is I need to play a sound, because we always play sounds. Let's go ahead and play, I kind of like pop, because it's like I pop into the pen. So code, sound, play sound pop. I'll go ahead and play it until it's done, because I'm going to delete myself at the end of this. I want to make sure that it plays. I also need to tell the pen to update, right? So I'm going to need to tell the pen to update. Whenever you communicate from one sprite to another, campers, what are we going to need to do to communicate from one sprite to another?
Broadcast.
We're going to have to broadcast an event. So he's going to broadcast an event. I'm going to have to make a new event name, so a new message. I'm going to call this one update pen. So I'm going to broadcast that the pen image needs to be updated. So update pen. And then after I tell the pen to update, I'm going to delete myself. So I'm going to come down in control, it's the bottom command, delete this clone. And so with code, you want to do things sequentially and you want to think about what needs to happen. And then you've got to execute your plan. So I'm going to change the number of sheep by 1 because I'm now in the pen. I'm going to play a sound because sounds are fun. I'm going to tell the pen, hey, update pen. And then I'm going to delete this clone. So let's go ahead and go into the pen and let's respond to update pen. So I'm in the pen now. In the pen, I need to go to events and say when I receive. So when the pen receives update pen, he's going to use the variable num sheep to set his costume. So looks, switch to costume. Now the question is, how do you switch to the correct costume, right? So it's going to somehow have to be based on num sheep, right? And so let's look at his costumes. So his costumes have names, they also have numbers. So I could set this by saying costume 1 or the name, which is called sheep 0. This is costume number 2 and its name is sheep 1. So there's kind of a weird off by 1 here, right? So when the sheep is 0, I want to use costume 1. When the sheep is 1, I want to use costume 2. So it's kind of off by 1 there, right? So I'll ask my campers, if I were to put this in here, it would work out badly because it's kind of got an off by 1. So what do I need to do, campers? Have you figured this out?
Number of sheep minus 1.
Yeah, so there's a statement that it's number of sheep minus 1. It's actually not minus, it's plus.
Oh.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I want plus. So number of sheep, so my costume is equal to the number of sheep. So right now it's num sheep is 0, so I want costume 1. Does that make sense? And so as the number of sheep increases, my costume is gonna get better and better. And it'll look like the sheep are going into the pen, right? Because the clone itself is gonna get deleted. Let's see if it works. So now I run, I've got a couple sheep here that are going in. So overall that was going good. One thing that was broken about my game is when I started it, it looked like there were sheep in there. So like when I started it, it looked like there were sheep in there. That's a mistake. And the reason it did that is because I never reset it to be empty. Does that make sense? So a task that I never predicted was necessary, I realized that I need to do now. I need to call update pen when the game first starts. I'm going to do that from the dog. So this is a task that I did not see coming, which is fine. I didn't plan for this. I just know that I need to do it now. So I need to, inside my initialize area, I need to broadcast update pen. And that way, like see how there's a bunch of people in there right now? That way when the game starts, it's going to update the pen to clear them all out. In fact, it would probably look better if I did that like really early, right? So I set the number of sheep to 0, and then I broadcast update pen, then I do the rest of the stuff. That way, even if I start with a bunch of sheep in there, when my game starts, they'll be gone. By the way, it looks like my original sheep is still on the screen here. I'm gonna go back and hide my original sheep. I don't know how he got unhidden, but I want my original to be hidden. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna move him way over in the corner and hide him there. McKinley, you got a statement? So she has a theory about how it happened, and that probably right, sis. But now I can put sheep in here, and it looks like they go into the pen, which is cool. And then eventually I'll get the final sheep in there, and then nothing happens, right? So our game is going really, really good. We've got the sheep touching the pen are moved in, tracking the number of sheep are moved in. The only thing I need to do now is what's called the in-game stuff. So I need to make sure I've started my timer, which we've already done that. And then once all the sheep are in the pen, the game ends, and I check for fastest time. Let's go look to see what the solution did on this. So you can see that there was this variable fastest time. And the idea is that it would track how long it took you to get all the sheep in. So I'll just go ahead and get them all in again here. All right, so I paused it there just so you didn't have to watch me collect sheep. But I'm about to push the final 2 sheep in, and then I'm going to let you see this is the solution, what should happen. And so what should happen is it should bark a few times, ruff, 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 ruff. It should say a message about how long it took you. And then if it was the fastest time, then it should update the fastest time. So there's a lot of details going on there. So let's go ahead and see if we can do some of those things. So when all the sheep are in the pen, the game ends. Our plan is that that's going to be a responsibility of the dog. So let's go into the dog's code. And a function we've never used is actually this check for game over. So now we're going to focus on check for game over. So what check for game over needs to do is it needs to check to see if num sheep is 10. Maybe I zoomed in too much there. So I need to check if my number of sheep is equal to 10. So I need an operator for equals. I need a num sheep is equal to 10. So if that happens, then I need to start my game over sequence, right? So my game over sequence has to do a couple of things. It has to say a message. So let's just go ahead and go into looks. I'm going to choose to have him think it, right? And so I'm going to have him think like, you win, is how I'm going to start. To test this, I could play the whole game. It becomes very tedious to test the whole game because you have to actually get to 10 sheep. So here's what I'm going to do. To make testing easier, I'm going to temporarily set this to 1. Now, whenever you do temporary testing like that, you got to remember to put it back later, right? But now you can see that we can test this much faster because we just have to get 1 sheep in, and then it'll say my message. Now, what I want my message to say is I want my message to be more complex. I want it to say, you collected all the sheep in some number of seconds, right? It turns out that you can't put the variable right into the sentence here unless you use this thing called a join operator. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to like slowly join this together. So I'm going to say, you collected all the sheep in, and then it's going to say like some number of seconds. And so what I want to do here, and Keegan will help you type this, don't worry. I'm going to grab the timer. The timer is in sensing. So timer is right here. So you collected all the sheep in this many seconds. Can you see how I built that up? So I started off with this thing. You collected all the sheep in timer. And then on this one down here, it says apple seconds. But where it currently says apple, I'm going to drop this other one. So I'm going to say, you collected all the sheep in blank seconds. And then to make sure that there's spaces, I'm going to make sure that there's a space after the word in, just to make sure that there's a space there. And then I'm going to make sure that there's a space before the word seconds, right? So there's actually kind of like a space there. And so I'm going to stick that in here. And so I'm going to say go. So now when I get one sheep in, it says you collected all the sheep in 4 point blah, blah, blah seconds. And notice that the game keeps playing. Well, the game keeps playing. That's fine. I'm going to stick on a stop all at the bottom here. So now the game won't keep playing. But as soon as I get one sheep in, it'll say you collected all the sheep in 4.5 seconds. That was just a little faster than I can read, so I'm going to bump the message up to like 4 seconds. And you can see how useful it is to do fast testing. You collected all the sheep in 4.18 seconds. Great, I'm going to go help Keegan type this. All right, so we are doing super good. The only thing I want to add is I want to keep track of the fastest time to make it like a game, right? So let's go to variables, make a variable, make the variable called fastest time for all sprites. You can see that I'm planning on showing this, so I use my like show it on the screen format. By the way, num sheep, I don't think I really need to show that, so I'm going to hide num sheep. And fastest time, I'm going to actually put it up in this corner, just because this corner is where my dog starts, right? Cool, so let's go ahead and have a cheat to where we can reset it. So here's what I want to do. If you press the space bar, then set fastest time to 999. 999. So we made the variable, and then the way we initialize it is kind of a funny system. You press the space bar and it'll just set it to 999. So that way it kind of like resets the fastest time. So like resets the high scores board. So now what we want to do is inside this check for game over, I want to see if this is the fastest time. So really what I want to do is I want an if statement. So I'm going to go to control, and I'm going to set it down here because I'm going to do like a little planning first. So I'm going to say if something is less than something else. My campers told me I was going too fast, so I'll pause for just a minute here. So we made this variable fastest time. We made this when space key press, set it to 999. And now we're kind of like building up an if statement over here. So this is eventually going to get in my code, but right now it's over here. So I'm going to say if my current time is less than the previous fastest. So I'm going to, on the right hand side, it's going to be like, so if my current time is less than fastest, the current time, by the way, is a variable that's in sensing. So I'm going to come down to sensing, and so it's the timer. That's what it's called. So if the timer is less than fastest time, and then I'm going to set fastest time if that happens. So set fastest time equal to the timer. So I had to kind of like jump back and forth quite a bit there. But I think the concept is pretty clear. So like if the timer is less than fastest time, then set fastest time to timer. And I want to stick this if statement just above where it does the thinking. I chose to put it above the thinking because I don't want that thinking to like hurt my fastest time, right? Oops, it looks like it's kind of blurred there. So I could test that, but I'm going to do one more thing really quick. I'm going to choose to bark a couple times. There's a sound that's built in called bark. It's actually already here on the dog. And I'm going to choose to bark 4 times. So to bark 4 times, I'm going to grab a repeat 4. And in sound, I'm going to play sound bark until done 4 times. And that'll be like the last thing that I do, right? So I'm going to think that thought for a little while, and then I'm going to bark some, and then the game will be over. You could choose to bark first. You could choose to do them at the same time. There's lots of ways you could do it. I'm currently at num 1, but I want to try it at num 1 just to see if it works. So I'm going to slowly win the game. So I slowly won the game. So that took 7.342 seconds. And then the machine gun barking. That's fine. Now I'm going to quickly win the game. So you can see right now it's 7.4 seconds. But if I quickly win the game... oops, I caught too many sheep. Hold on. I need to catch only one sheep. It's kind of a bad test. Does this look like one sheep to you, Keegan? Yeah, that didn't work either. All right, I can do this. I've got to catch exactly one sheep. So let's try to catch exactly one sheep for my test. So 6.17 seconds. It worked great. And then my machine gun bark. By the way, if you don't like how that worked, you could bark at the same time as you think things. I don't know if I would recommend this, but you could change it. So I switched it, right? So I switched it to where it's going to like bark first, and then it's going to think at the same time it's barking. Don't care if you change that or not, whichever you want. Last thing I want to do is put this back to 10, and I should have a finished game. I'm going to play it one time, see if it works. And so I'm going to go ahead and put my sheep in the pen here. My fastest time, by the way, is currently 6.1 seconds. I'm just going to hit the space bar to reset it. And now as soon as I get these guys in, then I've got my new record. So 17.3, not bad. I'm going to try to beat it just one time. So I think that I can beat 17 seconds. So I'm going to get them all in. I find a good trick is to go backwards with the dog. And if you want to be really fast, don't even get all the way behind them. Just get like on them. And that's actually enough for the dog. And I got 15.7 seconds. So I'm a winner. Once I finish my game, what I like to do is I like to share it. And I like to add some instructions. So use the Sheepdog to put your sheep in the pen with up, down, left, and right arrows. Cool. And then I could tell them how to reset the high score, but I won't. Now I've got a URL that I could send to grandparents, to friends, to family, and things like that. I suppose I should check in on my campers to see how they're doing. So campers, let's see how you did. All right, so Keegan, you're going to show yours first. This game has a little bit less originality, but go ahead and Keegan's ready to score his last sheep. And it looks like he collected them all in 37 seconds, which is his fastest time. Sissy, did you get yours working? So I made her wait with only one sheep left too, because it takes a while. Her fastest time is 70 seconds. And this one, because I made her wait, is going to be worse. But I just want to see if it works. So it says, yep, you collected them all. And it was in 115 seconds. Great. So you guys can keep playing to see if you can collect them even faster. Did you guys have fun with the hardest project of the whole week?
Yes.
Cool. I'm glad you liked it. I think this is a fun one. I'm sorry it doesn't allow for more creativity, but we kind of have to like focus it just to be able to do this whole thing. So the summary of this is really just coding is fun. I need to update the slide. And we learned a lot of cool skills about planning. How do you tackle big projects, and how do you assign responsibilities? We also learned a lot of cool tricks about like communication between sprites and having the dog move the sheep into the pen. Whew, that was a big one. Very impressed. Pat yourself on the back if you finished today. You are over the hump, and we will see you again tomorrow. Bye.